big race, Democratic side, two candidates running for governor, the establishment darling, the favorite, Ralph Northam, lieutenant governor, former state senator, and former congressman Tom Perriello, who is with us now. Tom, good to have you back on, man. You know, I predicted you were going to win the whole time, and I changed it. And I got to tell you, normally when I change my bet at the end, Tom, I lose, so that's the good news. Every time I've done that, I've lost. But I was very troubled by the Washington Post endorsement of the lieutenant governor a week ago. I thought that was really going to help put him over the top. How do you overcome that? Because, you know, they have a lot of influence up, especially in Northern Virginia with people that might have been undecided, Tom. How do you overcome that and win this race?
Well, you know, it just fell pretty flat up here, for one thing. You know, in the midst of the Comey hearings and everything else, there wasn't a lot of attention on it. And the substance of the editorial was such that it actually kind of got our base excited. It took some policy ideas that are very popular for us and tried to bash them. So really it's been something that's helped us with get out the vote turnout and the rest. And I think one of the things we're seeing in general is that people are looking less at the same gatekeepers to determine who to vote for. If those things still mattered as much, we wouldn't have had a chance in this race, and much less be the one surging ahead in the end. So, you know, we've got all the energy, the momentum out at our events. We can see it with the 24-hour straight of campaigning that we've done, and we've just gone back to the same things that have worked for us all along, which is doing these unfiltered town halls where people have a chance to meet directly with me, both online and in person, and we're just continuing to build that momentum around the state.
Tom, tell us about your 24-hour odyssey. I know you did that in 2010. Like, when does it start? When does it end?
We actually ended up doing from 7 a.m. until 8 a.m. the next day. And the idea here is we know there are a lot of people out there that are working a double shift just to, you know, keep food on the table for their family. And I want to let people know that I'm willing to work just as hard for them as governor as they work for their own families. And, you know, it really shines the light back on why we should be in politics in the first place. It's that graveyard shift, you know, at the truck stop of the single mom who's making less than $10 an hour trying to support her family. It's the women's shelter. It's the food pantry. It's, you know, the folks that are struggling on the margins. It's meeting with doctors and nurses in the ER room that want to see the Medicaid expansion come through because of all the holes it puts in the healthcare system. So, you know, for me, it's just trying to set a tone that I know people are pretty skeptical of politics for a good reason and want to show the people that I'm really serious about this and go out and spend that time doing it. So, you know, it's something that really means a lot to people when you show up, and we had a good time doing it.
Well, I tell you what, you run a very energetic, very spirited campaign. It's been fun covering it, I'll tell you that. And I loved your whole campaign from beginning to end, no matter how it turns out. Yesterday, from the way you announced just before Christmas, how you held that so close to the – there were certainly no leaks inside the Perriello campaign because that was a shock to everybody. And I think you've kept the lieutenant governor on the defensive almost wire to wire in this race. I mean, he's never really gone on offense once. Who's your campaign manager?
My campaign manager is Julia Barnes. She actually just came off as national field director for Bernie's campaign, so obviously knows something about defying the odds and pulling out some state-based races throughout that process that were very impressive.
You know, she's done a really nice job. Tom, I'm going to get into policy in your race, but you've been on my show a number of times here. Tell our audience a little bit about your family, your wife, and how you have come to Virginia and how they've reacted to this whole thing.
Well, you know, I was born and raised in Virginia. I actually grew up in Charlottesville. My father grew up in West Virginia. He was the son of Italian immigrants and got a scholarship to go to the University of Virginia. So for him, it was always really the symbol of the American dream. He went on to Duke for medical school and met my mom there. And after a stint of residency in the Army and the rest, they settled back there. So, you know, I'm one of 4 kids that got to grow up in Charlottesville and Albemarle County, which is a pretty special experience. And, you know, obviously represented that area in Congress. I've lived up in Northern Virginia for the last 6 years, has seen a lot of different parts of the state. I'm not married myself, but I have 10 nieces and nephews, most of whom are down in Charlottesville. So that's still sort of the family center, and one set of family up in Baltimore. So, you know, I bounced around overseas some with the work I've done in the national security space. in Afghanistan and West Africa and the Balkans, but always seen Virginia as the place to come back to back home. So it's a really special place. As I said, it's really kind of been the symbol of everything great about America to my family, and it's just been exciting to be able to give back as a member of Congress and now hopefully as the next governor.
From your congressional campaign to now, what's been the biggest difference? In these two campaigns? If you juxtapose your re-election campaign for Congress in 2010 to this campaign, what's been the biggest difference?
Well, 10 years ago, Facebook was how you reach young voters, and now Facebook is how you reach older voters. So the technology has changed. That's created a lot of opportunities. In this race, as you know, we've been outspent by millions and millions of dollars, and we've been able to break through by going out and not just doing these town halls, but having people cover them on Facebook Live. We did one sitting in the office last night and had 16,000 people around the state tune in and watch our town hall meeting. That just was not a technology that existed before. Another is that I think the things that we were trying to talk about 10 years ago were not as much on the radar screen, like rising extreme inequality, the disappearance of work beyond the manufacturing sector. And those are things that I think there are more conversations about today. As you know, I've talked a lot about the threat to jobs from monopolies in our economy, as well as from automation and technology. And I think those are conversations that are much further along than they were 10 years ago. So, some of the realities of the Great Recession and the shocks to the system, I think, have changed the conversations in the direction that we had been pushing.
Tom, give our audience a sense when you're talking right now to younger Democratic voters, which you're going to carry that demographic tomorrow handily. When you're talking to younger Democratic voters who are voting in your primary, what's the main thing that's on their mind, Tom?
Well, there are a number of things. Certainly student debt is very high on people's mind. And for those who haven't gone to four-year university, you see a lot of consumer debt. So it used to be you could make enough money to save just a little on the side and maybe start to buy a home. That cycle of opportunity that used to exist has become a cycle of debt, and that's a huge problem for folks. Certainly, Donald Trump's presidency is on people's minds. It is the emotive space where people are. They have the sense of a very, very divisive agenda, and one that has led people, obviously, to spend a lot of weekends out at marches and protests and the rest. And I think there's a huge amount of interest in trying to make sure that Virginia does not go in the same direction politically.
Tom, when you're talking to undecided voters, and they're undecided, whether it be in a Facebook engagement or something else. So, by the way, 16,000 people tuned in to Facebook Live on a Sunday night town hall meeting. That's pretty good, Tom. I mean, that's a lot of people on a Sunday night.
Thank you.
That's a lot of people, man.
Yeah,
think?
We were excited about it, and of course it's free. And so, part of what we've had to do as the underfunded campaign is to be creative. And I think that's because we're talking about interesting ideas. We're putting real solutions on the table. I think a lot of the undecided voters are breaking our way in part because of electability. I think people have figured out that we give Democrats the best chance not just to win in the fall, but to have, a surge that could bring a bunch of delegates along with us. So we kind of felt like we started with people's hearts by having the more passionate campaign with the bolder vision for Virginia, and then won people's heads by being able to show, hey, wait a second, this guy is, if you look at the statistics on the polls that have come out, we're exciting young voters, we're exciting communities of color, but we're also winning big with rural voters, which is the opposite of what people would have thought between myself and Dr. Northam. And I think it goes to this issue about what people are really looking for. And I think people are looking for a fighter who refuses to take any money from Dominion Power and the utilities, will challenge these monopolies and give small business and farmers a chance to be part of the new energy economy, the new agricultural economy, and all of these things. And so we're really running up numbers in those areas. So, it's a creative campaign, both tactically and substantively. And again, I think with the undecided voters, it's both the quality of the ideas, and they're seeing this ability for us to get around the state, campaign for 24 straight hours and still cap it off with, doing a town hall with 16,000 people online.
I mean, that's a big number for Facebook Live watchers on a Sunday evening for a town hall meeting for somebody running for governor in a primary. I mean, that's just a big number. I think people should. I mean, if I was on the other side, that would concern me. I saw that Northam had a rally in Richmond or something. I mean, there was like a handful of people there. So, look, his campaign just not generating any excitement. But I want to get to the fact you've been outspent this thing. When it's all said and done, Tom Perriello, what are you going to get outspent by? 3-1, 4-1? How much?
No, it'll be closer to. It'll probably be a little less than 2-1, but that'll be about over $3 million probably outspent. And that's a pretty significant margin when you're talking about what we're talking about. We'll see where final numbers come in. But we've had over, you talked about the 16,000 number. We've had basically 300,000 Virginians participate tune in by Facebook Live to our town halls over the last 6 months. We've done over 350 public events. We've done them from, all the way west, all the way east, all the way north, all the way south. Just been crisscrossing the state over and over again. And I think people really appreciate that kind of hardworking campaign that's bringing a lot of passion and doing a lot of listening. I mean, one of the reasons our ideas are resonating is that they're not really, ideas that just formed in my head. I went and talked to, communities of color in our urban centers about what they needed and went out to the reddest parts of rural Virginia. And I kept hearing the same things, like whatever happened to the trade schools and the apprenticeship programs. So we have 2 years of free trade school apprenticeship program or community college, looking at this issue that we need to start treating addiction as a health crisis and not a criminal crisis, where we end up spending $30,000 a year to incarcerate someone instead of trying to get them a little help. These are things that are resonating deeply in rural conservative communities, as well as parts of the Progressive Coalition. So, I think putting that together and listening, and John, as you know, my background is not really as a politician. It's as a peace negotiator. And one of the things I've done as a peace negotiator in Afghanistan and West Africa and elsewhere is that you go out and listen to sides that have literally been killing each other, and you try to find common ground. Luckily, we're just at each other's throats virtually and rhetorically in this country. And I think what I'm finding is I can go out and use that skill set as a peace negotiator to find some common ground. It's not going to be easy, but people are struggling. People feel like they're getting left behind, and we're putting together an agenda to change that.
So if you're elected governor, Tom Perriello, you've got to work with the Republicans. Obviously, they're going to keep control of the House, maybe just kind of, I was just saying this to Gene Ross, he might pick up 3, 4, 5 seats. Kirk Cox is going to be the speaker. Tommy Norm is going to be majority leader. You got a very conservative state Senate and a very conservative Republican House. Tom Perriello is governor. How are you going to work with Cox?
Well, the first thing is we're going to win a lot of votes in the red parts of the state, particularly against Ed Gillespie, who I think is exactly the kind of Republican that Trump voters, frankly, hate. And so I think we're putting out an economic agenda that resonates a lot better with a lot of conservatives. We're going to spend a lot of time there building up on this idea of how we move away from a monopoly economy and back to a small business, locally made economy. And I think that can make a big difference. And building up, legitimacy and political support in the communities where these legislators come from. I find that to be a much better strategy than, the backroom transactional strategy that, frankly, stopped working for Virginia a generation ago. So we'll sit down, we'll find common ground. And I think ultimately these guys have to realize that they're just a couple of years away from a redistricting map that, all veto any of the partisan district maps. So there's going to be independent districts. And in that, the Republican agenda, as it's been in practice in Richmond, is going to be a disaster because, it doesn't play well on the level playing field. So when we come together, I think this is about forgetting these 1990s divisions around the same set of issues and saying, we live in a different world now. We have a different set of problems. The problem of massive consumer and student debt is just different. It didn't exist before. The issue of automation and technology as the threat to our jobs. If you look at those 5.7 million manufacturing jobs that Donald Trump talks about us losing and talks about them going overseas, but 85% of them didn't go overseas. They ceased to exist because of technology. Mm-hmm. This is not something that is a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. The ways in which automation is going to disrupt jobs in the economy requires us to have this kind of revolving door of workforce development around the certificate programs and trade schools and the community colleges. So to me, this isn't an issue where we've got a group that's sort of stuck in this 1990 set of divisions. We want to look at what's actually going on in the economy today. That's got to mean we're talking about automation, monopoly, and debt. And that's a new set of problems, just like the issues of addiction, where we should be able to find common ground, and I think we will.
All right, Tom Perriello, final question I've got for you. Tell us about your GTOV, or Get Out the Vote ground game Tuesday.
Well, as we always say, there's only one poll that matters, and that's the one on Election Day. And this is a primary, and as you know, that is a fairly low information affair. People don't get as much news from state sources, so we still find normally at this point you know exactly who your voters are, and you're just going to get them and make sure you can drag them to the polls. In this environment, we're still reaching people who don't know the primaries going on or are torn between the two candidates. So we've put an enormous amount of investment in our grassroots operation, our field operation. We knew we were going to get outspent on the airwaves, so we put more into field as well as into, social media organizing. So we're going to be hitting every door we can, making every phone call we can. I'll keep crisscrossing the state as I can. And we're just really hopeful that people tune in and understand what a big deal this election is. As you are one of the great evangelizers of the importance of state and local elections that often get crowded out by the nationalization of the media. But this is a big deal, and we're going to keep pushing until the last poll is closed.
Make a prediction on turnout.
It's a great question. I think, if you look, there are a couple indications of big turnout, which is obviously good news for us. The early voting numbers are massively up relative to any previous primary. The New Jersey election last week, which was a much less competitive affair, had a 47% uptick. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we topped 450,000, but, predictions are a silly game this late, so I will try, although I just played into it. So what am I going to do? I think we'll have a significant plus up in turnout.
All right, I think the turnout is going to be bigger. I think there's going to be a very close race. And here's the good news for you. I predicted today that Northam is going to win, but let me tell you, Tom, every time in my life I have changed my bet at the last minute, I've lost. So that's the good news. Tom Perriello, thanks for being with us today. Whatever the outcome is, I want to tell you how much we appreciate your accessibility and coming on. You ran a great race. Kudos go out to your campaign manager, who I know from the Bernie Sanders campaign. I worked with her. I had Bernie on my show a number of times back in the day. Julia Barnes, she's done a great job. You guys have done the most you could have possibly done with the resources you have, and I think it is going to be very, very close, Tom. Good luck Tuesday night. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having us, and thanks for the show. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
More information, tomforvirginia.com.